I'll tell a couple stories I suppose. Obviously, Native American mythos is pretty diverse. My own tribe's legends are pretty non-existent for a few reasons, so these stories will be from varying tribes. This is the Cree legend of the paka, a skeleton monster. A paka is made when a person dies of starvation, or when cursed for their wrongdoing in life. This creature looks like, well, an animated human skeleton. Unlike most skeleton monsters in Native American lore, yes, there are more, paka may actually be benevolent at times, healing the sick or blessing a future hunt. But only if you give him an offering of his favorite food animal bladder filled with melted fat. The pakank is known for giving off a bone-chilling cackle, which announces his presence to all nearby. One Cree story about paka is as follows. After a long and successful day of hunting beaver, a man and his friend made camp in a clearing and quickly fell asleep. In the middle of the night, one of the hunters awoke, noting a feeling of displeasure in the air. He turned around to see a paka, sitting next to the campfire in an obviously irritated position. The hunter described the pakank as being made of bone and some skin, with a single thick strand of hair on the top of his head. The hunter awoke his companion, and they attempted to figure out how to soothe this obviously annoyed creature. The pair decided to offer the skeleton half of a beaver that they killed, to which he initially refused. The hunters eventually cut the halt beaver into bite-sized pieces and threw them into the fire. With this, the paka seemed pleased, and wandered back into the darkness. It should be noted that a paka is different from the being paka, or pagak. While both are skeleton monsters with similar names, paka is a unique entity, unlike the paka, which a person can become after dying of the aforementioned circumstances. This is the story of water babies, Native American spirits which lure people to their watery deaths by mimicking the cries of babies. These spirits are said to inhabit some freshwater lakes and rivers. The description of these beings vary. Some tribes claim that they appear as normal human infants, sometimes with fish tails, while other tribes claim that they are reptilian-like creatures that can simply make baby noises. Hearing one of these cries is not a good sign, and is generally considered to be a death omen of sorts. As one can probably imagine, giving into the lure and actively seeking out and attempting to find/rescue the baby never ends well for the person doing so. These spirits, the non-reptilian kind, are said to be created when an infant drowns. The story of the water babies at Massacre Rocks is one of the more well-known legends. In Idaho, near the modern-day city of Pocatello, there is a site known as Massacre Rocks. At one time, a Shoshone tribe lived in the area, and were suffering from a terrible famine. Unable to feed their newborn infants, mothers of the tribe were forced to drown their young children in the surrounding lakes and streams. Legend states that these infants grew gills, tails, and scales, subsisting off small fish and tadpoles. To this day, they are said to live in the area, around Fort Hall Reservation, attempting to lure in and drown unsuspecting humans. I should mention that many Western Native American tribes happen to share this legend. This is the legend of the horned serpent. The horned serpent is one of the most prominent and important mythological figures in Native American culture. This is mostly among many different East American and some Canadian tribes. These tribes don't regard this creature as animal, but rather revere it as a sort of mythological spirit, sometimes even a god. The serpent is described as living in freshwater lakes and rivers, typically appearing as a massive serpent with horns and long teeth. Horned serpents are described as, among other things, being able to shape-shift, control the weather, hypnotize people, and turn invisible. The story of the deserted children, which parallels the story of Hansel and Gretel, oddly enough, features a more benevolent horned serpent. In the story, a tribe sends their young out to play in the forest, then packs up camp and abandons the kids. The children return to find the camp empty, and decide to travel to the nearby river. They get to the river and ford it, only to find an old woman on the other side. Unbeknownst to the children, this woman is the spirit of a dead witch. The woman invites them into her tent for the night, to which the children oblige. In the middle of the night, she starts killing off the kids, leaving only one girl and her brother. After giving the girl some challenging and repetitive tasks, the children decide to run away. In doing so, they come across a homed serpent. The serpent promises to help them if they pick the lice off him. They do so, and the serpent takes them to the outskirts of their tribe's camp. Upon refuming, the serpent finds the witch, who demands to be brought to the children. Like with the children, the homed serpent asks the witch to pick the lice off him. The witch refuses and insults him, and the serpent proceeds to drown her. The story continues, if any are interested, but this is where the role of the homed serpent ends. I've got some stories from my tribe. We're from the west coast of Canada and have a few strange creatures. The first is Zinakwe, or the wild woman of the woods. She's tall and skinny with long dark hair, black skin, and bright red lips. Her masks are usually carved to show her in the midst of her kalhu. She is a giant and an ogress that preys upon children, snatching them in her basket and bringing them home to her lair in the mountains to feed herself and her children. She prefers to hunt at night and when it's especially foggy. If you can capture one of her children, it is said that she will grant you wealth in exchange for it, as she is known to hoard things like a magpie. Another story says she was tricked by a tribe and forced into a great fire. The ashes that rose out from it became mosquitoes. Last one is Bakspaksualanuksawee, or cannibal at the north end of the world, or he who first ate man at the mouth of the river. He is attended by a number of equally vile creatures. His wife Kamanaga, wearing red and white cedar bark, and his slave King Alalala, bring him his human meals. Koakskoakchulanuksawi, the raven at the north end of the world, pecks out his victim's eyes. Hoxyugwextwi, Hoxhuk of the sky, a giant crane, cracks skulls with its very long beak and devours the brains. Jelagajayi, crooked beak of the sky, and Ninstalid, grizzly bear of the door stand guard. These monstrous bird ogres are all an extension of Bakspakwalanuksawi himself. They are his eyes and ears, and nothing can hide from them. Bakspaksualanuksawee is the key figure in the Hamatsa secret society, or the Cannibal Society. He is invoked in a ritual dance by new initiates of the Hamatsa society, whereby they invite the spirit of the cannibal in and have to overcome it. The dancer gnashes his teeth and in some cases will try to bite onlookers. Healers come out with rattles made from human skulls and begin the process of pacification and cleansing. The legend of Bakspaksualanuksawee is retold with various dancers. Human flesh was said to be consumed during the ceremony by the one possessed, though he was forced to vomit it up afterward with seawater. The Cherokee people of Lower Appalachia have their own version of the Fae with striking similarities to the Celtic mythology of the fair folk. Called the Nunahi, commonly spelled Nunahi, which means the people who live anywhere in the Cherokee language. They were said to only appear to humans when they wished to be seen and took the guise of normal humans when interacting. They lived in underground townhouses beneath rocky mountain peaks, and their ghostly singing and drums could be heard by hunters in the mountains, but when they would go toward the sound, it would shift about and suddenly seem to be coming from behind them or from some other direction, so that the person hearing the sound would never be able to find where it was coming from. The Nunahi were very friendly to the Cherokee and often helped lost wanderers, especially during the winter. The Nunahi would take the person into their warm townhouses until the person was rested and ready to return home, if the person chose to do so. A well-known story tells about a man named Yanula, who had become separated from a hunting party. His men searched for him for a long time but eventually gave up and returned to their village, grieving for Yadala, whom they believed was dead. The Nunahi found Yadala and brought him back to their townhouse to live with them. Yadala became immortal and lived with the Nunahi for a long time until he began to miss his friends and family. One night Yadala went back to his village to see his friends and family, and he told them what had happened. When they asked Yadala to eat dinner with them, he said he could not, for he had eaten the food of the Nunahi and could never again eat human food. He told Inam he had only come back to visit and that he would soon be returning to the Nunahi. His friends and family begged him to stay, but he refused, telling them he could not choose death with his own people over immortality with the Nunahi. The Nunahi often warned the Cherokee of impending danger and protected them in times of need. One of the most well-known stones about the Nunahi tells how they helped the Cherokee before the removal in 1838, when the Cherokee were forced to leave their homeland and resettle in Oklahoma. According to the story, the Nunahi came to a Cherokee village and told the people to pack up their belongings and to be prepared to leave in 7 days to come live with the Nunahi, for a great catastrophe was about to happen, worse than anything that had ever before happened to the Cherokee. After 7 days, the Nunahi returned for the Cherokee and led them to a large stone deep into the mountains. As the Cherokee watched, the stone rolled away, revealing an entrance into the mountain. Inside the mountain was the most beautiful place the Cherokee had ever seen, and many families rushed into the mountain without ever looking back. However, some of the people refused to enter, and instead chose to stay outside and face whatever was about to happen to them. The people who remained outside were later forced to leave their homes and resettle in Oklahoma. The people who chose to live with the Nunahi escaped the fate of their fellow Cherokee. According to the story, it is from this group of Cherokee that the small number of Modem Cherokee who still live on their native land is descended. During the American Civil War, by which time Nequaci had become known as Franklin, North Carolina, a group of Union soldiers approached Franklin with the intention of burning it to the ground. A group of scouts returned to their commanding officers and warned them not to attack the town because it was heavily guarded by soldiers on every corner. However, the town was defenseless, as every able-bodied person had already left to fight in the war. Unaware of this fact, the Union soldiers then changed their course toward Atlanta, Georgia, bombing every town in their path. According to the Cherokee, it was the Nunahi that had protected Franklin from the Union soldiers. There is a story that tells about how some of the Nunahi eventually decided to leave their home. Near the Cherokee town of Tougaloo there was a circular depression in the ground, the size of a townhouse. The inside of the depression was waist deep and was always clean as though it had been cared for by unknown hands. Travelers passing by would often throw rocks and logs into the depression, but when they returned the logs and rocks would always be lying far from the depression. The Cherokee believed the place to be a Nunahi townhouse, and so they always avoided the place out of respect. Eventually, some logs had been thrown into the depression and were allowed to remain there. And the Cherokee concluded that the Nunahi had become annoyed by the presence of the white men and had abandoned their townhouse forever. The bit about the logs being moved out of the circle reminds me of the Devil's Tramping Ground in nearby Bear Creek, North Carolina. According to local legends, logs, large rocks, and even sleeping bags, with campers still inside, left overnight will be moved outside the grounds, a ring in the woods where nothing grows overnight. Cocopelli. Revered by the Indians of the American Southwest. Hopi, Navajo, Zuni, and ancestral Pueblones, Anasazi, all had legends involving Cocopelli. If you're familiar with Greek mythology, you can think of him a bit like a mix of Hermes and Pan, but more benevolent. A symbol of fertility. A minstrel, a spirit of music. A storyteller, a rainmaker, a healer. A teacher, a joker magician, a seducer. Cocopelli's music marks the transition from winter to spring. As he warms the world, preparing it for the sowing of crops, Cocopelli begins to play his flute. Legend has it that when a village hears his music in the spring breeze, they begin to sing and dance throughout the night. The next morning, every maiden in the village will find themselves suddenly pregnant. Sometimes Cocopelli is shown with a large phallus, so do Pan-like figures in Greek mythology. According to some legends, Cocopelli could detach his penis and float it down river. Being a god, he could still control it while it was separated from him. When it reached a spot in the river where the young women bathed, Cocopelli would have his way with the young women. You can see in both of these stories how Cocopelli is associated with fertility, making crops grow / making women pregnant, and also how he is both benevolent and a bit of a prankster.